Hi there, I'm Christy Wilhelmi from Gardenerd, and in this video I want to talk about spring planting because it's time. Here we are in the Gardenerd test garden, and our winter garden is just finishing up. So we have potatoes that we grew over winter, some onions that keep going, and lettuces that were planted in the fall, and some celeriac, and you'll see some wheat possibly, and some kale behind me. And those are all cool weather crops, and cool weather crops can be planted after your last frost date. Now, if you live in a place where there's snow on the ground or the ground freezes over, your last frost date is important because it is the date after which it is safe to plant out your crops. And if you live in a place that's kind of warm all the time, or if you live in a warm winter climate where you can grow year-round, frost dates don't matter as much, or at all in some cases. So let's talk about cool weather and warm weather crops. Cool weather crops include items such as lettuces, mustard greens, arugula, cilantro, all of your brassicas like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, and root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, turnips, and radishes. And also things that grow better in cool weather like peas. That's snow peas and sugar snap peas and shelling peas. Those all do better in cool weather. As the weather warms up, we move to warm weather crops, which include beans, tomatoes, corn, squash, and cucumbers, and melons. And I say warm, but that really means warm and hot. So as things get warmer, that's what you want to do. Now, when to plant these depends on where you live and whether you have a frost date or not. For those of us in Southern California and other places that don't have a real frosty winter, we can plant year-round. And so cool weather crops go in the ground in October, November, and they grow until about March or April. So we're ready to pull these out and put in our warm and hot weather crops. If you live in a place where you have snow on the ground, or you were part of February, it might be a little while before you can plant those cool weather crops. But once you can, then as the weather warms up, you'll transition into warm and hot weather crops. Next, let's talk a little bit about bed prep. Because whether your garden has been sleeping all winter long or you've had stuff growing in them all season, they're going to need a little rejuvenation before it's time to plant these new crops. So what you do is pull all spent crops and put down about 1 inch of compost, mix in a little worm castings and organic vegetable fertilizer, and mix it all in just into the surface area. I don't like to till things in. I've always said give your tiller to someone you hate. Let them ruin their soil, because tilling tears up the fine network that the soil food web has created in your soil. So switch to no-till, put compost on the top, scratch it in with your fingers, water it well, and you're ready to plant. Spring is also a really good time to plant beneficial insectary plants like nasturtiums and marigolds or calendula, and pretty much anything that attracts pollinators to the garden. If you were able to grow cilantro and parsley and dill and fennel over winter, let them go to seed, because once they flower, like this onion is doing, but differently, they form an umbrella-shaped flower, and that attracts beneficial insects to the garden who keep an eye out for you for aphids and other sucking insects that can take down your plants. Spring is also a really good time to plant potatoes, which are growing right here in front of me. Potatoes need to be sprouted first before putting them in the ground. So take a potato. Ideally, you would start with a certified disease-free potato that has not been sprouted yet, and you would sprout that. You can use the skanky potatoes that are in your pantry, but they're not necessarily disease-free, and they may have been sprayed to retard sprouting. But if they're already sprouting, then that part's not a problem. So you want to sprout your potatoes in an open lid box under a window that does not get direct sunlight, but ambient light. That way you'll produce short sprouts that will turn into beautiful, healthy plants like these. Dig a hole 6 inches deep, drop in a seed potato, cover it up, And I usually mix in a little extra organic matter in the base of the planting hole to help that plant grow strong. Spring is also a really good time to plant strawberries. If you happen to have a spot for strawberries, they are considered perennial for a few years, and then you may want to replace them. But we keep a perennial bed, 2 perennial beds of strawberries here at Gardenerd headquarters, and we keep them going year after year. It's important to remove all dead leaves and trim back any runners, add some compost around each plant, and watch them take off. They'll soon flower and set fruit, and you'll be enjoying strawberries by late spring, early summer. For more adventurous gardeners, I highly recommend growing some kind of grain. So wheat grows really well, and quinoa is the starter grain, the gateway grain, if you will, for spring gardens. You plant it, it grows very tall, and you get a high yield for the amount of space you're growing in. So try growing quinoa at least once. See what happens. If you fear that you may have missed the cool season planting time, don't worry about it. You can always plant these crops in the fall, and they do really well over winter. The thing to know is that you can plant them here in spring, they just might not do as well. If you live in a place that gets hot rather quickly, you can grow kale and lettuces and cilantro and arugula. They just may bolt to seed quickly. So it's not your fault, it's just that when these plants are subjected to hot temperatures and stress, that's what they do. So I find that growing them in fall is better. But I don't want to say you can't grow them. Give it a try. Or tuck them in a spot that maybe gets a little dappled shade during the day. They'll do a lot better that way. Oh, and let's talk for a minute about the difference between summer squash and winter squash, because there is a difference. Summer squash grows in the summer. Winter squash grows in the summer. They are both grown at the same time. The name indicates how long they store. So summer squashes are things like zucchini and patty pan squash and yellow crookneck. They have a thin skin that you can pierce with your thumbnail. Winter squash is called winter squash because it stores through the winter, and that's things like pumpkins and butternut squash and the thick rinded squash like Hubbard squash. Those are the types of things that store over winter. So you grow them at the same time during the spring and summer, and you store winter squash through the winter. So that's why you see those on Thanksgiving tables. So no matter what you plan to grow this spring, enjoy the process. They may take a little while to get going, but it's worth it. There's nothing better than harvesting your own crops out of your garden a few steps away from your kitchen. For more information on growing crops in spring and all the different crops that you can grow in spring, visit gardenerd.com. We've got a few newsletters that list our spring garden planting guide, and you can search for that in the search box. If you like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so that you can find out when our next video comes online. If you want to support all the things that we do for free on gardenerd.com, our Gardenerd Tip of the Week podcast, these videos and so much more, become a Patreon subscriber, and you'll get access behind the scenes and all kinds of other goodies. Happy gardening!